Recently, we've been talking about if God is still in Christian music. We covered Montel Fish's new image and direction that he's taken with some of his stuff, and formerly being a worship artist, a friend of the channel, and now seemingly going a new route that has caused some frustration with his Christian fan base and causing him to lash out a bit, to Caleb Gordon, John Keith coming on to have a conversation on if Lecrae or Maverick City Music or whoever is removing and diluting the gospel from their art. But believe it or not, this conversation does not just extend to Christian musicians and professional Christian YouTubers. This conversation extends to all of us, even if you don't consume this sort of content, because this conversation strikes to the core of our human experience in those of us who choose to follow Jesus with our lives. So on this video, we're going to talk about how this conversation of the Christian musician or the Christian creator directly translates and affects you.
Ruslan.
Some of you guys may or may not know, but my background is originally in music. I started making music in high school. I came to faith a little while after, and by the grace of God, I was able to continue making hip hop for the Lord, if you will. And that continued for years, and around 2008, 2009, it started kind of becoming profitable for me. And in 2011, 2012, it really became like a sustainable part-time job, leading ultimately to me quit my job in 2015 and pursue being an independent Christian musician. Now, in 2015, things were very different. TikTok hadn't existed yet, there wasn't as much discoverability, and streaming platforms were just starting to take off. So going full-time as a musician in 2015 was really a feat that few people were able to do without a major label or some sort of sponsor or corporation behind them. So I come from this space, I'm naturally a creative person, and the things that I see exhibited right now, whether it's within Christian music, Christian hip-hop, even Christian YouTube, Christian TikTok, Christians who are boldly professing and then seeming to deconvert, deconstruct, drift from the faith, or make art that just doesn't seem as congruent as it once was. And this entire week, talking to Caleb Gordon and John Keith and watching the Montel Fish situation made me think about this macro idea that I actually believe is something that many of us deal with, whether we like to acknowledge it or not. Hey, you may not know I make music, but I have a brand new song that just came out. Here's a quick preview.
I went from being a porn addict to sharing the gospel with a porn actress who was criticized for being low status by the same OnlyFans who treat us so lavish. I'm confused.
I swear y'all thought he did doing podcasts, hot takes. He still can rap.
Now, this is my first song that I've released in over a year, so I need you to go to Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you consume music and stream Too Soon right now. Add it to your favorite playlist, share it with a friend. So hit the link in the description or go to ruslantothemoon.com to stream Too Soon now. I'll see you over there.
Ooh, ooh, oh, they got me with the dramatics. You knew that a moment cannot be static too soon.
Now, the great reformer Martin Luther actually said that religion is the default mode of the human heart, meaning that the heart continues to work in a way that even after conversion to Christ, though we recognize and embrace the principle of the gospel, our hearts are constantly trying to return to the mode of self-salvation. So in this context, Martin Luther is not talking about religion in the way that James references as care for the widow and care for the orphan. He's talking about our need and our desire to work our way to heaven, to show our moral superiority, to show that we belong. This is our works-based framework for a lot of these things. I would also add that the other default of the human heart, and especially what we're seeing today all over society, isn't just religion, but it's also rebellion. It's also wanting to be our own God, wanting to live life by our standards and what we deem to be appropriate. And so if we think about everything that's transpired with the evangelical industrial complex or Christian music or whatever, it usually does default to one of those two positions: a religious way of approaching art and music and media, or a rebellious way of approaching art, music, media, and our own lifestyle. We default to one of those two positions. From the rebellion standpoint, people bow at the altar of authenticity. They may start out as a Christian fill in the blank, but eventually the highest virtue that they hold is one of authenticity and freedom and wanting to express yourself as honestly as possible, which can lead some to abandon their faith to worship at the altar of art. That if I'm being honest, when I went full-time with Christian music myself, I wasn't the most appreciative of the audience wanting to hold me to a standard that they had for my art, meaning that I felt like they had a religious attitude to how music should be, and I therefore rebelled against their standard. Now, all this did was make everything more complicated, and it led me to getting a lot of bad press and making jarring statements out of hurt and frustration, and not from a healthy, grounded theology and understanding of what it is that I'm supposed to do with my time, talent, and treasure, including music. And if I'm honest, it took me a while to transition from this mentality of wanting to be rebellious because I thought people were being religious, or people who are religious are frustrated with artists that seem rebellious. You see how it's a vicious cycle that never ends? But what really helped me break out of this mentality is, believe it or not, going back to what the gospel is. You see, the gospel is neither religious or rebellious. The gospel is about redemption, and redemption at its core is about buying us back into a right standing with God. And that is exactly what Jesus did on the cross. Meaning that the wages of sin is death, and that Jesus went to the cross to create a pathway to pay that debt so that we could be in a right standing with God for all of eternity. So anyone that would examine the life of Jesus can see him doing all sorts of things that were disruptive to both the religious Pharisees as well as the rebellious sinners. But all of it being anchored on the idea that we are not good enough to work our way to God through our religious acts. And also understanding that if we're really brutally honest, our heart is very deceptive, and our authenticity and our transparency and our honesty will often lead us astray. And so the pathway forward is neither religion or rebellion. The pathway forward is understanding redemption, understanding the gospel, understanding that salvation is by grace through faith alone, that I didn't do anything to deserve it, that I did not work my way to being saved. It was all the work on the cross, and that Jesus, plus anything, ruins everything. That is the good news. And understanding that from an overflow of that, from the moment that we chose to repent and believe, we were given new hearts, that we were made new, that we were born again. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. It doesn't mean that we'll go through all of life and never sin again. It just means that we changed our mind in repenting, which is what that word actually means, and we chose to believe with our heart that Jesus is who he says he is. That he literally lived, he literally died, and he rose on the third day in our place on the cross and created a pathway for us and the Father. And now the redemption part leads us to live our lives accordingly. Not because we're afraid of hell, not because we want to perform for God, not because we want to make music for God or do cool things for God, but that because we're redeemed, now we have the freedom to live our life in restraint to a higher virtue, to live our life as new creations. And so religion and rebellion are both wrong. If you're on the side of wanting to nitpick and push back and always be combative with your favorite Christian creator over the most meticulous things, that's not helpful. And if you are on the side of rebellion, you just want to do what you want to do because of your honesty and your truth and authenticity, there's a higher virtue to live your life by. That when we lived as new, redeemed creatures, we can live our life with restraint, with no longer being slaves to sin, but being ministers of reconciliation, of the good news of Jesus. And so I want to hear from you guys in the comments section. Which side do you naturally default to? Be honest with me. Are you the more rebellious type that always needs to poke and put your hand on the stove to see if it's hot? Or are you the more religious type? Are you the one that needs to keep all the rules and do everything perfect in order to perform for God? I want to hear from you guys in the comment section. If you guys want to go back and see some of the videos we did this week with regards to me, John Keith, Caleb Gordon, we'll put that over here, and my thoughts on the Montel Fish situation over here. I'll see you over there, all right? Peace.